Okay. Hi, my name is Emma Truman. I am 20 years old and I am currently a sophomore at BYU and in the process of applying for film school. So, with that in mind, I wanted to make my restoration project have something to do with film. So, originally, I was going to write a short film in the time period of Joseph Smith, and then I was going to shoot it and edit it and make a little short film about it. But unfortunately, that isn't very plausible, so I changed my proposal and I made it more of a film about that related to the restoration, but set in modern times of someone being able to using the restoration in this day and age because it's still something that blesses our lives a ton. So I started that and I then realized that I wouldn't be able to film it. So I did reach out to my TA and I told her that, but I still wrote it. And I also wrote a two-page research paper about all the research that I did for it. So my final project was mostly my script, which I didn't put my whole script in the slides, but I put just the parts of it that I think relate back to each other. So the first thing is I called it Finding Faith because I think it's really just a short film about people hearing stories about people from the Restoration, including Joseph Smith, and then them, you know, growing their faith and their testimony based off of those stories. So one of the stories I used was Joseph Smith in the first vision, and I used a couple other stories from my family history that I was able to find, which were really interesting. And so it was kind of just going back and forth between this mom telling her daughters these stories, and then these daughters and the mom telling the daughters the stories, and then it would cut through the different stories. So it's like them in their house, and then it's the people in the restoration in the Mormon battalion doing what they're doing. And so that's just how I had it. And I also had, the girls later on, they had them grow up. And when they're grown up, they're reflecting back on those stories they used to hear from their mom and how that affected them. And so it's just basically just using the past stories and then the present where the girls are hearing these stories and how the restoration has affected people even in this day and age and helped people to continue growing on in the word of Christ. So the reason I chose this again because I'm studying film and I thought it would be really fun to get to do a little film project and then also because of my family. So I on my mission I discovered that my family had been part of some of the big things that happened in pioneer history like the migration to Utah and the Mormon Battalion. So in the script, this is his name's Jacob Micah Truman, and he's one of the stories that I wrote about. And this is his wife. And then this is a picture of my great grandma and her dad, my great grandpa. And they're in this house that was built in the 50s, the 1850s, I think. And it's a little house in Gunlock, which is where the story takes place, the modern day part of the story takes place, which was a house built by my great great grandpa and where my grandma grew up in. So I thought it'd be cute to tie that into the story. So it was a really fun project for me that way. So the first like citation I used was Joseph Smith's first vision account, the 1832 one, because I really wanted to focus on him being a child who was really interested in learning about salvation in the churches and how, the girls would hear this story and they'd react to it and be like, well, a 14-year-old boy doing that, that's crazy. But it would stick with them. And as they grew up, it was something that helped them to grow their testimony. So here I cited the part where, therefore, I cried unto the Lord for mercy because I think this part's really interesting how it's not just about him restoring the church, but it's about him restoring that covenant path, the way that we can all be forgiven of our sins and find a remission of our sins. And then the second one I used, this is it's a text from my family tree, Jacob Micah Truman, pioneer and servant of God. and it was written by a distant relative, and it's published on the Family Tree app, and I found it's really long, but one of my favorite stories was about him during the Mormon Battalion. He fell off a horse and almost died. So I used the citation where Jacob Jacob had not only been healed through the power of the priesthood, but had walked a day's journey across the desert with only a scar to show that an accident had occurred. And it's just one of those little miracles that when you hear it, it's almost hard to believe, but it's really cool to think that God notices even the small people and the smallest of moments. And it just reminds me a little bit of the movie 17 Miracles because you watch that movie and it's like they didn't have a fun time. They were going through hard things, but even then they pressed forward and through the priesthood there was many miracles that helped them to get through it. So, um, so one way I can apply something I learned from my project in my life is I think it really helped me to understand more the importance of the restoration in this day and age. I think a lot of times we think of it as a past, like the restoration period, it's already over. But I think that it's something that continues on. And I think that the reason they had such hard trials and there were so many faithful saints in that time was to be kind of an inspiration for us. I think that when we have these stories to look back on, or we have these little films that we can look at and watch and hear these stories of our family members and the people who did all these crazy things, like traveling across to Utah and the tundra, is it's really inspirational to me.